certainly for, I think, a lot of leaders who have folks who are struggling, it's hard to see our people struggle. So the focus has been on how can I get them back to where they feel good? How can I kind of take care of them? But I really would like us to be thinking about the lessons learned in this time and the silver linings, because I think there's so many of them. I think the humanity we've brought to the workplace, the flexibility that has just sort of been dropped on us that that we didn't maybe think was possible before. There's just so many silver linings. And what I would like us to be thinking about and challenging is, as we start moving back and transitioning back to whatever a new normal might look like, we are taking those silver linings and really being intentional and thoughtful about how can we leverage those and continue to challenge our thinking and bring some of those things that now we have evidence that they really do work, they can work. And let's not just, drop the experiment because circumstances have changed. Let's keep pushing on the experiment. Yeah, that's really important to me.
Yeah, I love that you use the word experiment, because I read something somewhere that said this has been the biggest work from home experiment alongside the biggest homeschool experiment. And that's not even including all the folks who have, been laid off and furloughed and all of those things, right, that are really, really kind of crippling our economy, and people are feeling the hit on those things. But, we saw, like you said, a lot of companies quickly go to this, we just need everybody to work from home. And I saw it in organizations where they had maybe in the past told employees, you know what, sorry, we're not ready for telework. That's maybe 5 years or 10 years out. We don't have the right equipment. We don't have the right tools, et cetera, et cetera. And to see that immediate shift, granted it was clunky, was not pretty, was not perfect, but it was a shift. And in a lot of ways, it was a shift in mindset too.
Yeah, I think, I know my own organization, we're taking a lot of pride in how quickly we were able to make that shift. But our focus was primarily, I think, around tools. Like, we were making sure that the technology was in place and people understood how to use Zoom well or how to use Teams well. We did some really cool things, like we made sure we did a chair delivery. We made sure everybody had their comfortable office chair. And so we were thinking a lot about the tools. I'm not sure that maybe we put as much energy into the relationships and the connecting people. We thought about taking care of our people as making sure they had the tools to be productive and comfortable. And those were important, there's no doubt. I think, and when I think about the lessons that I would like us to take from this and the silver linings, I think that the next wave of awareness was around the relationships, and taking care of our people meant something different than just the tools and their physical well-being. Yeah, and I think then we really started focusing more on the connection with them and how we maintained a real connection with our staff.
Yeah, I agree. Prior to COVID-19, I had helped a number of companies actually roll out their telework. Those who are really interested in trying to move forward with teleworking, because as we know, we're getting more millennials in the workplace, those darn millennials. And people ask,
millennial, right? Like, not to label you, but okay.
Fully sarcastic remark. But seeing more requests for flexibility, more requests for work balance, more requests for just mental, kind of health. And so anyway, so I had helped organizations, but as I was doing that, I was kind of researching best practices around telework. And you're right, it really comes down to, do you have the right practices in place now that help to support successful independent working environments, right? So I bring that up because what I started to see with companies moving quickly to this remote work environment was people coming to me saying, I'm having trouble knowing how to keep my people accountable. I'm having trouble with this idea that I have to trust them, to work out of sight and be productive, right? And so what I found was that this remote work situation only brought to light and kind of shone a light on some of the challenges or issues that had already been taking place in the office prior to COVID-19.
Totally. That was one of the learnings that I had early on was where there were cracks. I felt like remote work just sort of turned them into chasms. So whether that was between relationships, whether that was between trust, whether that was between communication or even communication rhythms, things that felt small and kind of clunky all of a sudden turned into some really big things. I had a person on my team that one of the things we've been working on for a long time is kind of staying parallel paths. She tends to sort of get ahead of me, and then I kind of am catching up to her. And we've been working on it for about a year. And once we moved to a remote environment, that kind of small issue we'd been working through just turned into a huge thing. And we had to stop and really have some intentional conversations around how to work and stay connected in a different way than we had in the past. So yeah, I think those relational issues or communication issues, alignment issues, small things kind of have a tendency to get bigger, but right. So the opportunity there is it shines a light on them, and you're sort of forced to maybe deal with some things that in the past it was kind of easy to sort of brush aside or make do or work around. So maybe silver lining is it's tough, challenges us to have some difficult conversations, but maybe it makes us in some ways a healthier organization.
Absolutely. I think about, when you go to the doctor and you've got this like recurring issue that keeps coming up, and we all talk about this, right? Like you can totally band-aid it. You can go every single time and get something to kind of take care of it. But at some point you've got to go, is this a larger issue? Is this symptom actually indicative of a larger like health issue that I'm having? And how do I address that? Like maybe it really is my diet. It really is, exercise or sleep or whatever it is. I've got to make some true lifestyle changes in order to stop having this issue. So I think about an organization in the same way as if we're having issues with people being productive, people not communicating, people working in silos, people, not being able to trust others or not be accountable, etc. If we started to see that in this remote work experience, know that that's probably indicative of some larger issues, right? Like I had managers asking me, I need some way to keep these people productive during COVID-19 and know that they're doing their work. And I'm like, okay, what did you do before? And they're like, what do you mean, what did I do before? I saw them. And I'm like, okay, but so see right there. Yeah. So,
and I think it along those same lines, right? Like, we had questions about accountability. Well, how do I know they're being what do I hold them accountable for? And it's like, well, what do you hold them accountable for too, or hold them accountable to prior to this? Well, I knew they were on the phone because whenever I walked by, they were on the phone. Well, maybe they were on the phone to their mother-in-law. I don't know. How did you how has that changed now? And so I think thinking about things like concepts like productivity and accountability and trust, huge opportunities for us. What I worry a little bit about is going back to this idea of an experiment, right? Is sometimes I worry that it was just long enough to create pain, but was it long enough to push a solution, right? And so does the pain, have we kind of gotten over the hill of pain so that we have to fix it in our current state or whatever the future state looks like? Or is it so difficult that we go, yeah, that's a problem spot, but thank goodness we're all going to be back in the office in a few weeks, so I just am not going to worry about it. And I would challenge us, like, now that we're more aware of those things than ever, it's time to dig in and resolve those once and for all, regardless of what the future looks like.
Absolutely. You and I were chatting last night, because again, we dork out on this stuff all the time, guys, like webinar or not.
Yeah, this is actually exactly what we were doing at 10:30 last night.
Last night at 10:30. But, I lost my train. Okay. We were talking about like this whole notion of, okay, like this has been kind of a nightmare. It's been frustrating to have people working where I can't see them. It's been frustrating to not be able to pop my head into somebody's office. It's been frustrating to have employees who've got kids running around and dogs barking and whatever. Let's just get back to the office. Let's get back to normal. Let's get back right. And you and I were talking about how this isn't like, we went to the mainland for vacation and then now we're tired of it. Let's get back home. What we're returning to is not the same. It's right. Still not going to be the same, no matter if it was only 6 weeks really, but it's not the same.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this analogy of, it's like we got forced to head quickly towards this cliff, right? And it's a good cliff. It's a positive opportunity cliff. And we sort of got, we might have, some of us were kind of walking that way, sort of meandering, sauntering that direction. Some of us are going a little faster and others were like, eh. But so all of a sudden there was these tailwinds like pushing us like, oh, the cliff, we got to go that way. And then we sort of got pushed off that cliff quickly. And I think some of us went and others are still like, it's like the cat on the hang in there baby thing on the tree limb, right? Like, but it is a whole new, rather than thinking about going back, it's a whole new opportunity, right? To reinvent the way that we work and reinvent the way that we're thinking about work in the office and employment and the employment contract between us as bosses or managers and our employees. You know, if we think about that cliff as opportunity, we can jump and embrace it and explore it. Versus kind of hanging on, hoping that someone will throw us a rope and pull us back up and whew, okay, that nightmare was over, we're back.
Yeah. One of the things you and I were chatting about, this is just we're just gonna keep saying what we talked about last night, but we talked about social norms and how this has disrupted social norms. So think about organizations that are pretty hierarchical. You know, there's someone who sits at the head of the conference table. There's a way that, you know, when you go to have a meeting with somebody, there's an admin outside their office, kind of, what are you here to see them for? And, you know, well, they're in a meeting, right? Those things change when you're using technology and you can literally just chat anybody, or you can get on a video meeting. You know, I like to say, like, everybody has the same size square, right? In one of these meetings. And so it starts to democratize and starts to break down some of those very formal, traditional norms. So what do you think about that, Sarah?
Yeah, I love, again, the opportunity that's there. I had a conversation with a staff member yesterday who was sharing that she has really felt empowered by this kind of democratization, right? She was sharing that the social norms in the past in her work group, she has felt like, for a variety of reasons, that she needed to kind of tone things down. She was cautious about speaking up or bringing up ideas. And she was sharing that in their remote team meetings, she just feels like, she feels very empowered to be able to say things. She said, I don't know if it's because I can't see their faces. I don't know if it's because then I can say what I need to say and then mute and be like, whoo. She said, but there's something really powerful and empowering about this experience. And I've recognized that in a lot of our town hall meetings and our all employee meetings, people, I'm seeing a level of engagement from staff that I think are feeling empowered by this technology enabled communication that I think, again, is really cool. And there's a lot to be said for it.
Yeah, you're also making me think, as you're talking about that, like the human element that this whole going virtual has done, right? I mean, I think I've seen more people's, you know, kids, dogs, messy houses, you know, t-shirts and no makeup and scruffy beards than I've probably ever wanted to see and don't want to see again.
Yes.
But I mean,
I love that side of it. So, you know, when we talk about people being the most important asset in an organization, you know, when we say that, I'm hoping we mean people, whole human beings, right? And sometimes that comes with, you know, messy buns and, you know, a pile of laundry in the background, like that whole person. And I know for me personally, the blending of me being a mom and me being a wife and me being an employee, those have all been very compartmentalized worlds. You know, like me being a mom stops at 7:15 at drop off in the morning, and my head over the poly is my transition into Sarah work mode, and then end of day, same thing, reverses back, and never the two worlds shall meet, right? And so this transition, this blending of those, I think has been a really healthy thing for a lot of our employees, a lot of people I talk to, and I can only speak personally, but it's been incredibly empowering for me and a much healthier way of approaching my own well-being, for sure. Absolutely. What about you? You're struggling, I mean, not struggling, but you're killing it with balancing all of these homeschool things, kid things, job things, family, wife. I mean, what about you? The blurring of all of that.
Oh my gosh, it's struggle is the total right word. So I have 3 young kids, for those who don't know, under the age of 10. They're all being somewhat homeschooled. I don't even know if you can call it that. And yeah, I mean, at first it was kind of fun, right? The whole like, oh, this is cool. Like everyone's home together. It's like camping. It's like a long spring break. And then, you know, ish hit the fan. It was like, okay, no, this is not going to work with, you know, the kids and whatever. And then my husband decided to get a puppy in the middle of all this. So let's just leave it, you know, there. But I think you're right in terms of really, people are seeing the real side. And, you know, people like to talk about Brene Brown's work in vulnerability, right? And the fact that as leaders, vulnerability and authenticity is one of the key things that really foster trust in our people. And so I love, actually, I mean, as crazy as it's been, I had a client who, I'll tell you a little story. I had a client and he's a CEO of a pretty, you know, important company downtown. And I was walking him through some talking points and whatever. And then my son comes in the room and he's like, Mom, I need you. And I'm like, trying to motion, like, get away. And he said, I was in my class and my internet just dropped. Like, I can't, you know, I'm in my class and I need help. So I told my client, I'm sorry, can you hold on 1 second? I got to help my son get in his class. So I go to help him. I come back to the client. I'm so sorry. He goes, that's okay. I met your daughters. They were just with me. And
So cool.
like, oh my gosh. And then my daughters like thought they were now part of the meeting because, you know, they had met the CEO. And so why not? Right. Anyway, so people are really seeing that side, but I think it goes to what you're saying about if we're really honest, or we're really genuine about saying we want to value our employees as they are, their whole self. I think we've got to honor everything that comes with.
Yeah, I think so. I am aware too, though, that that's a challenge, right? I think that for those of us in OD or in human resources, I tend to believe we got in this field because we view the world that way, right? Like the humanness of human resources is important to us. It's something we value. And I recognize that's not always as easy for all leaders. And so I'm thinking about how we help leaders recognize this new skill set going forward and how we help them grow that. You know, we've talked about emotional intelligence for years now, right? But I feel like it's almost an even deeper brand of emotional intelligence. It's like a real genuine, I don't know if it's like tolerance for humanness or what it is, embracing humanness. I don't know, but it's risky for people, and I recognize that, and it doesn't come naturally for everyone. So I think that's one of the takeaways, I think, for us as OD and HR folks is how do we help develop that in our leaders where it might not be super natural and inherent to people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And knowing that that's what our employees desire from us, right? That's what makes good leaders is feeling like the person is valued, feeling like, you know, they're seen. You know, I read somewhere, and I love this quote, that moms are the leaders of their families. Like if you watch a mom and what she does, or a parent, not to say moms in general, but just parents or grandparents who take care of children, they're demonstrating leadership and decision making, right? And multitasking and all of those things on a day-to-day basis. And so how do we honor that piece of who they are? And those, I can speak for myself, like the jobs that I've loved have always been with those managers who've treated me as a full person who brings all of these qualities both in my professional life and in my work life.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking about it for a while at HEMIC about one of the core competencies of a leader is caring, right? That's just, it's kind of a non-negotiable. But we have to recognize, I think, that we have to meet people where they're at. And for people who've had a long career in management, that hasn't always been, we're kind of changing the game, right? And that hasn't always been something that they're comfortable with. So again, how do we help people feel like, you know, they don't have to be psychotherapists. They don't have to be like, there's a professional caring, right? That I think we're all capable of and need to show. And to your point, our employees are expecting it now, I think. And need it more than ever.
Yeah, and there's also just on the working mom thing, I just want to offer another point that someone once made, and I loved it, which was this was a person whose boss said, you know, hey, I was going to assign you this project, but I realize you've got young kids at home. I realize this probably would be too challenging for you. So, I actually gave it to the guy, next door kind of thing. And so one thing I just will say is, while we want to be empathetic about our employees and their situation, at the end of the day, it really should be the employees saying, no, I want to take that on. Like, sometimes I find I get a little irritated when people are like, oh, you've got kids at home, it's okay. Like, I won't ask you to do something. No, I want the challenge. Just because I have kids does not mean I don't care about my career and whatever. So just be mindful of those kinds of biases that we might have in the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. Yeah.
There's something I wanted to ask you about the terms that we've been using. So things like back to normal or productivity has been a really interesting term being thrown around a lot during this time. And even the term like essential versus non-essential. Talk to me about what comes to mind when you hear these types of terms that have been thrown around during this COVID time period?
Yeah. One that really sticks with me is accountability. And it's just a word that, I don't know, I hear it and I go right back to like being out playing in the field and hearing my mom on the front porch yelling my full Sarah, Elizabeth, Lindsay, you get back here right now. Like, for some reason, there's something about accountability that inherently means like I'm in trouble and I don't like it and it doesn't feel good. And so I feel like accountability is one of those terms that, and you know what, maybe rather than generalize that everybody feels that way about accountability, maybe the point is exploring some of those terms, right? Like thinking about not assuming that the former definitions of those terms, accountability, productivity, are going to mean the same thing, because all of the context has changed. Productivity is another one where for me, it conjures up like reports and checklists and, somebody making sure you're doing what you're doing and busy, right? Like, this is very productive. Look how busy I am. We used to talk about an analogy of a rocking horse. A rocking horse moves a lot, right? And the best ride on a rocking horse is the one where you move the most, but the rocking horse never actually moves, right? So there's a difference between movement and progress. And I think thinking about being intentional about the terms we're using is really important. Essential is a really good one. I think that's a tough one.
I bring it up because language has such an impact on the way that we view things, our mindset, our culture, right? I mean, not to go too deep into it, but you think about the story of Native Hawaiians and the loss of language and all of the impact that that's had on culture. So, as OD people, we try super hard to be intentional about the language and the terms we use. So I've been hearing our OD colleagues, shout out to our OD people at Kaiser, saying the now normal, even beyond new normal, because now normal implies that it's normal for now. And it could change, and it will change, 3 months from now. And it might change again in 6 months from now, and probably will, right? Yeah. So getting comfortable with, it's not a back to something, like we said, it's not even necessarily a new normal. We want to imply that it's an ongoing shift of what normal is, and that needs to change. Go ahead.
No, keep going on that one.
Well, just on the essential versus non-essential, and I get it that we had to create these categories that made sense, but what does that mean, right? Like, couldn't we have used something like frontline versus support, or just some way to still create these categories that help us to, delineate the types of work, but some of those terms really hit the heart for people and said, gosh, I'm not essential. And you think about that for a while, that can actually start to impact your psyche. Like, well, then what's my purpose then? Why am I here if I'm not essential?
Yeah.
Right? So just being mindful. And again, that's not to diminish any of what organizations have done, because again, a lot of this has been unprecedented, but we've just got to be careful. So another one that I've been advising on is not saying return to work, because people have been working, and for many, they've been working harder than they've ever worked before. I know for me, I'm been making this habit of like scheduling meetings right after each other because I don't have to commute. I don't have to go anywhere. And so now I feel like I'm just constantly in this go, 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 go. So I was trying to say return to the office, return to the workplace, you know, but not return to work.
Yeah, you shared that with me early on, and that's I shared it with our CEO. I had an opportunity that day. We started drafting some communication, and he was using the return to work, and I just said, you know, let's think about that language, because I think it's really important to recognize some folks have been working harder than ever for a variety of different reasons, and so let's think about that work, or those words. You know, I was thinking about Ku'u, the normal, right? And Gwen, thanks for your comment about normal will never be the same. And so I almost feel like it's almost like we should just eliminate normal out of our dictionary. Like normal implies stability. Normal implies, and I think we just got to get used to the fact that it's just not. So like going back to the cliff analogy, we don't know. It could be like maybe we're going to fall off that cliff and some amazing parachute we didn't even know was going to come flying open. Maybe we're going to fall off that cliff and it's literally just a couple steps down and we're on the next plateau that we just can't see right now because we're on the top of that cliff. You know, maybe we're gonna, I don't know, who knows? The little kid from the movie Up is gonna be right below us and we're gonna end up on a batch of balloons flying up in the sky. Who knows? But what we do know is that there's not a normal. Like, let's just stop hoping to get back to it, to a new one, to the old one. Like,
right.
Let's not even use it. Let's be okay with the fact that maybe the new normal is that there isn't a normal, and that's gonna be okay.
Yeah, I love something my grandma used to always say, which is that there are seasons to everything, right? There are seasons. Yes. And I love thinking about things as seasons because we know seasons change, right? Like, also, well, in Hawaii, it's just kind of one season, but season, we got flooding, you know, we got sunny. So thinking about it as a season, this is a certain season we're in, and the season is going to change. And that again, using those types of terminology can just help us in our mindset be prepared for continuous change.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a big fan of the seasons analogy too. And in seasons, different things thrive and different things have to hibernate. And some things are going on below the surface that you don't even see, but they're preparing, right? There's all different stages in seasons. I love that analogy. Yeah.
So, you know, so like seasons, you got to be prepared. You got to have the right tools, the right, you know, attire, etc. So as we think about going forward and knowing that things are going to continue to change, let's talk about what skills are people going to need, and what do organizations need to be equipping not just the employees but also the leaders to be able to do.
Yeah, one of the things we explored last night that it really stuck with me, I've been thinking about it all day today, is it's like we've talked, I mean, there's change leadership and there's embracing change. We've talked about that as OD people for a long time, but it's more like this more refined skill set of seeing opportunity in change. You know, there was some really interesting, an article that I read that talked about some of the best hires and most transformational things in business have happened at the very beginning of recessions, because it's when there's no normal, right? There's no known and everything is up for grabs. All those crazy, wacky ideas, it's like, why not try it? And so because all of the normal is out the window, I feel like there's a skill set that is, it's like being able to see things that aren't yet there, being able to view opportunity that's around the corner, but you're not quite, you know, put things together, see opportunity in things. I'm sure all the OD people on the line are like, and they're telling me exactly what it is. If you put it in, if you know what the word is, but it's that, right? There's a skill set of being comfortable with ambiguity, not just comfortable, but like leveraging it and using it as opportunity, not fear or anything else, but it's something about finding opportunities actively.
Yeah. I think it's always, what can we learn from this, right?
Yeah.
And what can we be doing differently? You know, so I work independently, but I have friends who do the same. And, you know, we had lots of talks about, do I stay in the business I'm in or do I pivot, right? Given that needs are going to change and all of that. And for me personally, I decided to pivot. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to wait around to think about what I should do or whatever. I'm not a huge company that would take, you know, all these decision makers to get in a room and talk about it. I can just decide tomorrow I'm going to pivot. And I think being able to do that, being able to think around the corner and anticipate what might come and be adaptable and flexible is really going to be necessary.
Yeah.
I like the quote, necessity is the mother of innovation. And so how can we think about, like you said, this time being a time where we can actually innovate things, come up with new, right?
Yeah. I do think practically things like, I think our communication skills are going to have to be better than they've ever been, and not just verbal communication, but technology enabled communication, asynchronous communication. I think those things are going to be really important. I mentioned earlier this competency of caring and connection, I think are going to be more important than ever, certainly in leaders. So you could call that an emotional intelligence. I think it's maybe a branch of emotional intelligence. I do think like resilience and the ability to lead through in ambiguous times, be able to cast a clear and compelling vision. Those things, those very practical skills, I think are going to be important at more levels than just most senior leadership. I think even our middle managers are going to need those skills, where in the past it might have been something that was reserved for C-suite folks.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we think about being in a pandemic and what that does to people, especially now, 6 weeks in, I think we're all starting to feel an emotional, mental toll of this, is really having a strong sense of the why. Why am I doing this, right? Like, and when managers or leaders ask me about how do I keep my people productive, how do I get them to, you know, share what they're working on and stuff like that, and stay focused, I just say, hey, you got to think about it, right? Like if this is impacting people mentally and emotionally, they may not want to get up. You know, they may not want to get out of bed. So what is it that's going to drive? Sorry, it's not going to be a task sheet. It's not going to be, you know, trying to check off some boxes. It's really going to be feeling this greater sense of purpose and mission that they're connected to. So I think the same goes for when we get people back to the office or whatever this next phase of transition is. It's still going to have to be the kind of burning platform as to why this work is important. And again, it's not going to be because we need to meet our bottom line, or because, you know, there's got to be some deeper purpose that people feel.
I love that, Ku. And you and I've talked before with our nonprofit partners, right, about coming from the private sector. I envy some of the nonprofit leaders, because I feel like that purpose is so compelling and it's right there, right? And so maybe one of the things to be thinking about is how to even more directly than ever connect all the work in the organization with the frontline mission, right? So helping people in accounting, or helping people in you know, facilities maintenance, helping those folks connect pretty closely and directly with your client services, right? So that they're seeing the impact of the organization. Certainly in the nonprofit sector, where you guys are doing heroic things, making sure those stories are getting told probably more than they ever have in the past, so that people can continue to feel inspired and compelled, because when they do, then all of that other motivation, productivity reports about how many calls you fielded and, you know, how many widgets you made, those things just work themselves out if you're going to work because this is your passion and this is how you deliver on your purpose. It just works.
We know that from all the research that's been done about employee engagement. People, there's this thing called discretionary effort, which is when people go, they don't just do their job description, they go above and beyond, right? And you know, I think about the people who, like, they don't just do their work, they bring scones to the office and they, like,
yeah,
they champion things. Those are the folks that are really, really driven by the mission. And so, yeah, to your point, we've got to make that more clear than ever, I think.
Yeah. You know, a quick example of that, I hadn't really thought about it until you just mentioned that, but our IT team has just been, again, heroic through this time when we had a lot of folks kind of learning technology on the fly. And talk about a team that has risen to unreal heights, right? And I would connect it back to the work they've been doing over the last 6-9 months around their purpose, right? And their purpose to support and enable a world-class, in our case, world-class insurance enterprise. And so they saw the call, right? Like they saw the Batman signal in the sky go up, and it was like, here's our time to shine. And those guys, they were heroes. And so thinking about discretionary effort, like their leader did such a great job of connecting the opportunity to what needed to get done, and they just rose to it. Yeah, and so I think that idea of tapping into purpose to get to the discretionary effort and the engagement that's the key.
Yes. And sorry, that is my yappy dog, if you're just wondering.
I love it.
You know, there's something we were talking about a little bit earlier about innovation and really encouraging people to think creatively. And one thing I will say about that is, while it's great for us to tell people, hey, be creative, go innovate, we've also got to be mindful as leaders of creating the environment within which they can be creative and they can be innovative. And to that point, I think creating spaces is going to be more important than ever to create safe spaces where people can speak up and be heard and not feel like they're going to get the hand slap, they're going to get the, you know, no thanks, or we've already decided, or thanks, but we've got it. If that's the response they've at least been accustomed to, we've got to make sure we're breaking that down. So as leaders, we got to look at, are there certain gatekeepers? Are there certain policies or processes or protocols we have in place that actually prevent people from really, you know, generating really great new ideas that are going to help propel our business forward? So creating that psychological safety as managers for them to speak up and take those risks is going to be, I think, really important.
Yeah, I go back to what we were talking about earlier around small cracks become big chasms. And I think if an organization is making the decision to continue with dispersed teams and remote work, you got to work through that, right? Because I think that's one of those things that might be easy to sort of band-aid during this transitionary time, right? And say, well, no, that, you know, we're into innovation, we're into big new ideas, but we don't really have to listen because we'll go back to normal, right? And so I think you're right. I think if you're going to say democratization and innovation and bringing up big ideas is important, that's some deep OD work in an organization to develop the trust and buy-in from the most senior levels. Otherwise, that gets really, really challenging and can, I think, actually have some negative consequences if it's not done well.
Yeah. So one suggestion I'd have is, if you haven't been doing it already, is as you are starting to prepare for the next season or the next phase that your organization is going to embark on, is get that employee voice. Ask them, right? Because people who are closest to the work can tell you what works for them. They can tell you what doesn't work. For example, one thing I've been cautioning leaders about is making certain assumptions about telework based on this 6-week experiment. The reason is because it's been during a pandemic when people are watching kids and dogs and whatever, right? And it is not an actual telework, you know, in a normal, not that we're not trying not to use that word, but you know, it's not a usual situation. So just be careful about making assumptions, because I hear it happening now where people are saying, you know what, this telework thing, it just doesn't work. Yeah. People can tell you, you know what, it's been very challenging. It does not work, yes, when I'm trying to be this Anna elementary school teacher. You only hired me for this job, but I'm doing this job, you know, full time as well. And so, you know, have people, so like one thing I'm working with a client on is creating a survey that asks people, how has this experience been for you, you know, to date, and tell us about the things that have worked, things that haven't worked, what barriers have you had, etc. If this were to continue in some way, shape, or form, what would you anticipate it looking like, given, you know, maybe some of these barriers being removed? Because people may say, actually, I really enjoy teleworking. I can do my best thinking. I can be the most creative. And I don't have people knocking on my door and, you know, having the employee party of the month or whatever to distract me. Yeah. So just kind of thinking about what's worked and what hasn't worked, and really getting the employee voice and input on that.
Yeah, I love that. There's two things that made me think about. One is One of the things, and this might be a no-brainer for everybody else, but it was an aha for me, thinking about flexibility and what individual arrangements might look like going forward, and that it's a continuum, right? Workplace flexibility, whether it's flex time or flex space, is a continuum. And we don't necessarily have to mean 5 days at the office, 5 days at home. It's either or. It's really about where's the best place you're going to be able to get that work done. And it might be a blend of 3 days in, 2 days not. And so it starts with, how do you best accomplish your work? And what is your work? What is the mission of this job? And how do you best accomplish that? In what environment? And how do you be creative about the blend of those things, so that we're not thinking remote or in the office, because it's just not black and white like that. And I think even further, you know, in our organization, we have 115 employees. We're small, but we have 115 employees. We have 115 different personalities. Why would we think that 115 people would do exactly the same kind of work in exactly the same kind of environment? That's just, when you think about it like that, that's crazy. It just doesn't make sense. And so I think when we're thinking about flexibility, starting with the key responsibilities of the job and the mission of the job, and going from there on a continuum of flexibility, I think is a really smart place to start. And then I had an experience that I wanted to share that I think is important as we're thinking about going forward. So there's no doubt the increase in humanness and flexibility and compassion for this kind of crazy experiment we were all thrown into is really commendable. I think the survey is the right thing to do, but I think for those of us in OD and in leadership positions, I think there's some pre-work that's got to be done to ensure long-term commitment to whatever we're going to commit to, right? Whether it's flexibility, whether it's openness to these alternative work arrangements. I will share an example that I've heard where when talking about long-term flexibility and kind of stress testing the senior leadership buy-in, the comment was, well, of course we were flexible during this time, but it's not sustainable. We have no intention of sustaining this level of flexibility. And it was like, oh, good to know. Like, whoops. So I think the survey and getting the employees' needs is critical. I think also at the same time, OD and HR and leaders in charge of this thinking also need to get a really true temperature check for where their senior leadership is, because I think there's a lot of risk in an organization to create inconsistency, fairness issues, if you're not really aligned in that. Yeah. And I think there's risk in asking employee input before you know what you can really deliver, what the organization is ready to deliver.
Very true, very true. I think we've got to be careful not to overpromise.
Right.
And underdeliver.
Yeah.
And to your point, I love what you were saying about really looking at the position itself and asking ourselves, you know, yes, to date, productivity in that role has meant this person comes into the office, you know, to an office 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and, you know, is physically there. And that's how I know that this position is being done. However, you know, in the last 6 weeks or so, a lot of you have noticed, oh, actually, this position can be done pretty well, not in an office, maybe not 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, right? Maybe some kind of mix or whatever. So maybe we've got to actually fundamentally look at, you know, how these roles can best be performed. And also the people who are in those roles, maybe those people best perform in certain ways. Like, I think about kids, right? And how some schools have actually moved, like, let's say high school, they've moved the start time to 9 o'clock because they know that kids' brains and all that stuff, they just better function at a 9 o'clock hour. Kauai, the county of Kauai just announced that they're going to try out a 4-day work week. 4 days at 10 hours, 4 days at 10 hours a day, right? So let's please use this time to think beyond what we know and say, hey, there are alternative ways of getting this work done. And the reason I want to press us on that is because, you know, as we move even more into a digital and global age, there's so much global competition for talent that I think you're going to see, and again, those darn millennials and the generations coming after them, are really going to start to demand more of that flexibility and look for it and hunger for it, right? I think I'm a perfect walking example of that. Left the 9 to 5 thing and I'm loving it. And so how can we meet people where the needs are at and still get the results that we want?
Yeah, yeah. And Ku'u, you encouraged, you asked some questions early on that I think were so important. I mean, if you go back to that example, school, perfect example, right? Like the school model, the 9 to 5, Monday through Friday school model, that was about a farming culture, right? That was about an agricultural society who needed students to be working at certain times, like, or kids to be working on the field. Like that's where that model came from. Well, that's not our world anymore. Similarly, the 9 to 5 Monday through Friday model came from, whatever, you guys all know better than I do, Industrial Revolution. You see the pictures of the people sewing, like, that's not our model anymore. It is for some, it absolutely is for some industries, no doubt. But what I would love in this time where normal is out the window and boundaries are out the window, why wouldn't we reevaluate those things? And why wouldn't we challenge, do those still serve us? Do those still serve our employees? And if our employees really are our most important asset, how does that structure and that kind of arbitrary system still serve our organizations, right? And I think in a lot of pockets, we have evidence over the last 6 weeks that flexibility, compassion, humanness serves us really well. And I know we have a lot of examples over the last however many 100 years of places where that 9 to 5 model doesn't serve people well. It makes them unwell, doesn't maximize productivity, doesn't maximize buy-in and purpose. So why wouldn't we challenge some of that thinking?
Yeah, I see, what I see with teams that work where you've got people all over the world kind of working on a remote team is that they create core hours, right? So they create kind of expectations like between 10 to 2 Hawaii Standard Time, we expect that, you're going to be available for meetings and et cetera. But other than that, people are given maximum flexibility.
Yeah.
Work. And I think that's when, I hate to say it, but I think that's when we truly start to treat people like adults. We truly start to entrust people. That's part of the reason why I'm out on my own, is because I was tired of feeling like I couldn't be trusted to be a professional and be accountable for my own work and get it done in the way that I knew I could do it, get it done. And I just think if we're going to hire people and we're going to say we trust them and we hire them for certain skills and experiences and et cetera, let's allow them to do that.
Yeah. I think just such an obvious example is going through this experience, and hopefully this is helpful to folks. And if you can use this example, please, by all means. Our IT help desk, when we've talked about workplace flexibility in the last year, I'm embarrassed to say I was one of the first people who was like, yeah, the IT product or project manager, he can probably work remotely. That makes sense. The systems analyst probably can work remotely. I get that. But IT help desk guy, he's got to be in the office. He's customer facing, internal customer facing, et cetera, et cetera. Well, during this time, you know what? I'll be darned if our IT help desk guy has been an absolute shining star. Through Teams, through remote desktops, through technology, he's absolutely killed his job. Now, I'm sure that there are things that he's still going to have to go into the office from an equipment perspective and things like that. There's no doubt. But it has really changed my thinking on a job that if you had just asked me off the cuff 6 months ago, is that a job that could have been done remotely? I would have been like, no, there's no way. Absolutely changed my thinking. And that has opened the possibility of what other jobs do I just assume cannot be done? Maybe can. And again, on that continuum of flexibility, right?
Yeah. So if anything, I hope that this challenges our notions of what can be done, when and where and how. So that, I mean, even in that, we are practicing innovation and creativity. I love what you brought up about fairness and equity, and Gwen had a really good point. Over the years, I know that many people with disabilities have asked for flexibility. They've asked for accommodations to work from home and have been told, no, your job is not eligible for telework. And over the last 6 weeks, it has, or at least they've seen their colleagues around them get that experience. So we've got to be very intentional as we're bringing people back to the office or whatever we're phasing people into, about this sense of equity and what's really fair based on the position and based on what can be really arranged.
Yeah. Yeah, Gwen, thank you for making that comment. I think it's a really good one. I watched a podcast early on with sort of one of my heroes, Laszlo Bock, and he was talking about dispersed teams. And one of the risks that I don't know the answer, but I think the awareness is really good to be thinking about making sure that remote workers don't become sort of the subclass, right? Just because we don't see them. And it's kind of the old, like, the gender argument about the locker room, right? And so do we risk people not being in the office and not having FaceTime with their boss, somehow not getting the promotion, somehow we see them as lesser, right? And I think so examining our bias really is what it is around remote work. And I think there's a lot to be done there about, that goes deep, right? When you start thinking about childcare issues and just issues that might push remote work. Examining bias, I think, is going to be really, really important for us as leaders.
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
There's actually a bunch of anecdotal research about people who work remotely feeling less likely to be promoted, less likely to be because of the things you described.
Yeah. So I don't have the solution, but I think it's definitely worth keeping on the front burner and thinking about as we're thinking about this new way of working.
Yeah, one quick virtual facilitation tip I learned is if you're going to have a blended workforce, some people in the office, some people working remote, is whenever you're doing meetings, bringing them together, put everybody on remote, like everybody logs in virtually. Even if you've got 30 people in the office, they all log in virtually, because again, it goes back to everybody has the same size square. Everybody has the same amount of voice. By having people in the room, you're kind of giving them that extra voice and FaceTime.
I love that. So going back to competencies, right, that we were talking about in this new workforce, maybe there is something around leadership and goes a little deeper, how to build inclusive teams, right? Inclusive dispersed teams or something. Like I'm thinking about the virtual water cooler, right? How do you create the meeting after the meeting when nobody, so thinking about—
press that red button now. Okay, bye.
Yeah, exactly. And then everybody hangs out after everybody else hangs up. I don't know. Yeah, but those are real things, right? And those are connected to social norms and the inclusion and those things. I think that's important to be thinking about.
Absolutely. Man, see, this is what we just geek out on this stuff. We could go for hours. I'm sure we could. We have like 1 minute left, and I just want to ask if anybody has any questions. I did see Elizabeth asked early on if we could talk about restaurants. One thing we didn't talk about was all of the whole, like, make sure you have hand sanitation, make sure you have, social distancing, etc. Like, I think all those things have been talked about a lot. And, I didn't necessarily want to spend time talking about those physical things, because I think we can find a lot of information on that. CDC is coming out with guidelines. We're really focused on the people side. But is there anything you would say about restaurant reopening and maybe things you're thinking about on that end?
It just goes back to social norms, and it's a completely personal opinion. I was out today, ran down to the drive-through, and I was struck by how many people were out and about not wearing masks today compared to last Friday. And I just think, again, going back to social norms and how can we as organizations continue to make it okay and expected, whether it's through policy or guidelines, that people continue to do safe practices so that we can move forward into whatever it's going to look like, and we don't get constrained by a relapse back into this pandemic. So I think whatever that looks like in our role in organizations, driving positive, healthy, and safe social norms.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I think, as I've been going out every now and then to get groceries or et cetera, I experience a sense of sadness, right? Like it hits your psyche as you see people with masks and not smiling and not wanting to make eye contact. So I would just say, as leaders, as you start to think about bringing people back into the office, just be mindful of what that could do to the psyche as people are expected to stay apart and don't linger, don't hang out, don't meet in conference rooms, right? Stay apart, wear your mask the whole time. Is that going to really produce some of the best? Like, are people going to want to bring their best, or they're going to want to hurry up and get out of there? I know I want to hurry up and get out of grocery stores these days. So just be mindful about what that could do to people.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Gwen says, Ron wants to know if he can share this recording with the team.
Oh, Glenn. Yes, you may see, here comes my worlds colliding, right? My geeky OD HR thing and then my HEMIC day job. So yes, by all means, absolutely. And let Ron know if he'd like to continue the conversation. I'd be more than happy to. And that goes for anybody on the call. We knew we were going to have easily an hour's worth of content. And so if anybody would like to reach out and continue the discussion, I would welcome that. I'd love to continue talking about these things. And if there's been anything of value that you want to continue to explore, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Absolutely. So I want to thank Sarah. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom and insight. And to all our participants, thank you so much for spending the hour with us on a Friday. This was useful to you. I echo Sarah that we'll be making the recording available. Please, this was meant to just be a kind of a service. So share it out as much as you want. And we'll be following up to ask you what other topics might be useful to you that we can bring together. So with that, aloha everybody, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Aloha, happy May Day. Go celebrate.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.